in Poland are now driven to a large degree by, and where I think the key question of the future of Polish-German relationship will be, is the key question about the future of Europe, and whether Poland and Germany will find a common vision, whether Germany will be open to embrace views that are quite different on key issues, or whether there is really going to be a mismatch. Right now, the vision is really, the visions of the Polish government, of the German government, the momentum within the EU are quite different. Poland does not see eye to eye with Germany when it comes to refugees policy, climate policy, or the vice versa. Maybe German government does not see eye to eye with the Polish government on those issues. The big elephant really in any room when it comes to Polish-German relationship is energy security and the question of Nord Stream 2. There is no, the case that the German government has been making that Nord Stream 2 is a purely economic project carries no water, not only among the government, but also very much in the expert community and the broader public. There is no agreement about the future shape of European defense and security cooperation. And there is frankly, and so that's all on the European side. If we look at the key areas that Germany wants to push further integration within the EU, especially after September elections, especially now with the win from President Macron, none of those areas align. And in fact, one would make a bigger case of whether the vision of Europe as a more of a federal unity, even though we are not, no one in Germany is talking about federalism, but is talking about deeper integration within the Eurozone, or Europe of nations that is emerging from Warsaw, how those two visions are comparable. And then lastly, because we are both transatlantic organizations, there is an increasingly different perspective on the transatlantic relationship. I would sharpen some of the points you made, and I mean sharpen. I would maybe slightly disagree on the intensity. I think especially after the visit of President Trump last week, there is no question in Warsaw when it comes to the strategy to embrace not only the US, but the current administration very, very strongly. It has a deep structural reasons, especially the security relationship between Poland and the US, both the US presence within NATO, but also on bilateral basis. Colonel mentioned the US Army. The US Army is here, it moved in, and that's the bond that binds very, very strongly. But politically, most governments in Europe are very hesitant about President Trump. And the Polish government, especially with the strong show last week, has deeply embraced the current administration, which then if you compare the pictures from Warsaw to the pictures from Hamburg, were striking. They are overdoing the comparison, of course. But I think when I go to Berlin, I hear increasingly the debate about the strategic choice that Germany could make. And yes, the plan B, finding an alternative, it's not a good idea. But people are starting to ask this question, while in Warsaw this is just not a debate to have at all, and that is playing increasingly within the Polish-German relationship as well. So, you know, that actually, I didn't mean to maybe put it this way, but it was a full list of things where the two countries are quite far apart, and it's besides that, this is further by the somewhat unhelpful rhetorics from both sides, one can point out to many statements from the Polish government, and I'm not going to do this. One can point to a statement, to statement also from, for example, from Mr. Schulz, who knows, he's a major candidate. He could be a chancellor. So unlikely, I agree. But I'm just pointing to that point that if this was a choice of the German people, this would put even further strain. So the tricky moment is very tricky indeed. There are certainly good aspects. One can point to, since we are talking about security cooperation, to the cooperation within the multinational core Szczecin. One can point to a cooperation and German presence in the Baltic states. The economic relationship is tremendously close. In fact, the political problems that I described totally don't match the deep business relationship that the two countries have. But it's really we are really in a bit of a crossroads. I would even make maybe a point that especially with the change of government, that represents a different part of Polish society that the previous government and maybe several previous governments represented in the last 27 years. There is a need for maybe not new reconciliation, but certainly come back to the dialogue of reconciliation and talking about some very basic issues between the two nations. But it's really, in my view, it's the work and the dialogue around the future of our common European house that will either further divide or bring our two countries together. But it won't be. It certainly won't be. It will be a bumpy road for a few more years. I'm happy to engage in any of the points. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm in a difficult position for two reasons. One of them is that, of course, I'm the last speaker. The second is that I'm the only one who is not a citizen of either of the two countries I'm speaking about. But these are two countries which had certain effect on my life, going back to when I was a secondary school boy and was working in Dresden, unfortunately not with Vladimir Putin, but in the Purotex Wäscherei, in a laundry in the night shift, in order to learn German, which maybe Dresden was not the best place to learn proper German, but that's a separate matter, those who know the pronunciation over there. And then, of course, some good times in the Soviet Union and scholarships in Germany and now work in Germany. So two countries which matter to me a lot. 2 weeks ago, the Levada Center, which is now domesticated in Moscow, basically leadership cut, replaced by loyal people, published a survey. The survey was about the 10 most popular, 10 greatest Russians in Russian history. And there is no question that a fellow Democrat, Josif Vissarionovich Stalin, was winning it massively with 38%. And he was basically the only non-Russian in the beginning. And there is only another non-Russian. And that's already about German-Russian history, although with a little bit of Polish taste, because that person is Katarina the Great, who is coming from Szczecin or Stettin, as you prefer, and who is neck to neck with Lermontov at the very end of the list, but still among the first 10. So this is quite something. The next thing is that Frank-Walter Steinmeier, when he was German foreign minister, for the first time had a speech at the Russian Academy of Sciences and said Germany and Russia always had intensive relations, which was always moving from one extreme to the other. So it was never in balance. Either the two countries were too close to each other, or they were too far from each other, or actually they were fighting wars against each other. So this is a very sensitive relationship which is not in balance. Has it found a new balance? It would be difficult to say. I remember 1990, the year of 1990, I spent in Vienna negotiating the CFE treaty with a good number of friends, many of them Polish friends. And I remember that between January 1990 and July 1990, it was basically impossible to talk to Polish diplomats. Whenever I said to my good friend, many of you know Adam Kobieracki, I said, Adam, another beer on the Graben? He said, you know, the Soviet Union collapses, Germany unifies, you know, there is a problem. Okay. So it was very difficult. And then came July and they got the Oder-Neisse border reconfirmed, and then everything was a little bit easier. The interesting thing is that Germany tries to show a lot of understanding to Russia. And it already tried to show a lot more understanding than some other Western players during the Soviet Union's time. If you just remember the lovely collision during the beginning of the Reagan administration about the pipelines, whether Germany would not be too dependent on the Soviet Union if it's buying oil and gas from Soviet sources, which was a far more complicated scheme than one could describe it so well. The second, an issue that already came up in the discussion earlier today, 2008. For our Polish friends, 2008 was a turning point. The Russian Federation has shown its real teeth. It committed an aggression against Georgia. Germany, which was opposed to bringing Georgia closer to NATO at the time, was taking a very conciliatory attitude and said, yeah, but Saakashvili is a populist, you know, he's always saying these stupid things, Liliputin, you know, Lilliput, you know, the little guys, and so on and so forth. So he's basically punished for something that he himself partly caused. Okay, so for Germany, the turning point is not 2008, it's much more December 2013. With Guido Westerwelle, poor guy, going to the Maidan, very much supporting the demonstrators, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, a week later, he is no longer foreign minister, it's Frank-Walter Steinmeier again, who says something that is very important for me, basically saying, maybe a choice for Ukraine is simply too difficult between one side and the other. So this constant attempt with balancing, you know, not blaming the Russians, not alienating them, bringing them on board, the German experience. And of course, if the Germans are negatively vocal about Russia, it's very difficult for them. Go back to 1955, you know, 54, 55. Some Russian authors say that the Ostpolitik did not start in 1969. It started with Konrad Adenauer's visit to Moscow, and so on and so forth. So a lot of things, and a massive amount of history. And of course, two continental powers. And leaders that have understood each other very well. Steinmeier and Lavrov. Lavrov basically said that he lost two friends last year. Kerry and Steinmeier, because the current relationship with Zygmunt Gabriel is definitely not as it was, not to mention the Tillerson-Lavrov meetings are not the warmest of all. And then, of course, two other relationships, Merkel and Putin. two people who speak each other's language, who have a lot of remembrance, East Germany, the Dresden reality during the Gorbachev era. And of course, somebody who was from the FDJ and a natural scientist. So I don't think that they have a particularly good relationship or a particularly warm relationship. But they know that they are lastingly there. And when you do not want to leave your spouse the next evening, you try to behave. Because, you have to go home the next, you don't know how it is.
Yeah, I do. Just a picture of Merkel.
Okay. So, that's a lasting relationship. You do not want to alienate the other partner. And here is history. This is the Berlin Congress of 1878, with Bismarck in the middle, the Russian foreign minister next to him, and the Hungarian-born Count, the foreign minister of the Austro-Hungarian Empire on the other side. But this is history. Okay. This is more recent history, and this is a very sober view. Two people who are not too much smiling, to say the least. And of course, the two countries by now, in many senses, can't be more different than they are. And that's the entire argument in the chapter. Both countries are large economies, but the German economy is 3 times larger than the Russian one. If you just take the GDP, the total German GDP is 5.4% of the world's total GDP, and the Russian GDP is 1.8. It depends how, there are plenty of different calculations. The Germany's main strength is the economy, a highly competitive economy, but overwhelmingly with high value-added production. And if you are producing high value-added products, you have to sell them. So you have to have a liberal world economy in order to maximize your benefits. Export and free trade are underlining German politics. Russia exports a lot, but it's low value-added. So for instance, whereas Germany may suffer from any kind of major hiccups in the world economy because it would result in more unemployment in Germany, which the current government was, and already the Schröder cabinet was so successfully pushing down, it would come back. And of course, the UK will be a major loss, but China is far more important. Germany and Russia are very much connected. In 2014, 5,700 German companies were investing in the Russian Federation, and 5,100 is still there, which basically means that the German economy is waiting for better times. And there are very big ones. One is just getting into trouble, Siemens, as of now, Volkswagen, and everybody else. So it's very much important for both parties. Historical experience with democracy is very different, although neither had much luck with democracy until the middle of the 20th century. Since then, the larger part of Germany has become a prototype of democracy. Russia still lacks democratic success. Democracy for Russia, 1990s, is chaos, corruption, and criminality. So their assessment of democracy, what democracy brings, is so fundamentally different. That is the foundation of disagreement. Germany was defeated in World War II, and also in World War I, but that's a separate matter, and there was no doubt left that a historical chapter of Germany is closed. When General Keitel asked Marshal Zhukov in the bunker, you remember the story, he read the one page, Unconditional Surrender was the title, and he said, can we negotiate this? And Zhukov looked at him, saying, this guy must be crazy, We occupied your territory, we defeated your Wehrmacht, and what are we speaking about? So Germany knew that there was a barrier, and it had to start a new life. Actually, 2 Germanys had to start 2 new lives. The Soviet Union lost the Cold War, but nobody ever said to the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation that it lost it. So they said, yeah, but it's basically continuity is possible. And the bumpy 1990s continued in a return, a rejection of the new system, rejection of the junior partner role, and returning. Germany has no option but to insist on liberal democratic values. This is part of its World War II, post-World War II and post-Cold War identity. Without it, Germany cannot exist, or it's very difficult to imagine. We are all suspicious about Germany in a nice tacit way. I just can tell you things that people don't remember. The Soviet Union did not ratify the Non-Proliferation Treaty as long as the Federal Republic did not ratify it, which was very clear. We are worried about German military power, you know, the rebouncing of history, 1968, 69, 1970. Russia turned around and without much of a genuine innovative set of values returned to the Westphalian sovereignty-based system, which also disrespects the sovereignty of others and denies Western values, or many of the Western values, while at the same time taking advantage of a globalized economy. The two countries are both leading, but they are leading very differently. Russia insists on leadership, at least in its neighborhood. John-Louis Gaddis would say alliance by imposition, whereas Germany is precisely the opposite. Germany does not want to stand out, does not want to be visible as a leader, because that results in all these kind of hesitations that Germany does not want to generate. At the same time, Germany occasionally is very firmly deciding on matters, but it's doing it with some taste. You know? Okay. Be it the recognition of Croatia or and Slovenia, be it the seat of the European Central Bank. These are decisions which were taken like this, you know, without too much. Or, of course, the lovely second pipeline that you mentioned. I was sitting in a pub in Hamburg with German friends, and I said, look, but you should really take into account